There is a question that almost every person who follows Alysa Liu has had at some point. You watch the interviews. You see the competitions. You see her father Arthur standing ringside, beaming. Always there. Always the loudest presence in the room. And somewhere in the back of your mind a thought forms. Where is her mother? Who raised this girl? Who were the women in her life? And when you start actually digging for that answer, what you find is not a simple story. It is not one woman. It is not even two women. It is a layered, complicated, quietly emotional picture of multiple people who stepped into that role at different points in Alysa's life. Some by choice, some by circumstance, some without ever officially holding the title. So today we are going to do something nobody has done on YouTube yet. We are going to trace every single mother figure in Alysa Liu's life from the very beginning to right now. And by the end of this, you are going to understand her story in a completely different way than you did before. Let us start with the most basic layer of this. The biological one. Alysa Liu does not have a mother in the traditional sense. She and all four of her siblings were born through surrogacy. Her father Arthur made a deliberate decision, as a single man who wanted children, to use anonymous egg donors and surrogate mothers to build his family. 2 surrogate mothers in total carried his 5 children. Alysa was born in 2005 in Clovis, California. And the woman whose egg made Alysa possible was white, anonymous, and by design, never identified. Arthur has spoken about this openly. He told Alysa when she was around 8 years old, after she asked why she looked different from him, why she did not look fully Chinese. He sat her down and explained the whole thing. Alysa later told reporters that she and a friend had almost figured it out on their own before he even told her. So when he finally did, she was not shocked. She already kind of knew. But here is the thing about that anonymous egg donor. She is not a mother figure in Alysa's story in any emotional or relational sense. She is a biological fact, a starting point, a genetic reality. She is not someone Alysa knows. She is not someone who shaped her. And yet she is also the reason Alysa exists at all. That tension, between genetic origin and emotional reality, is something a lot of people born through donor conception spend their whole lives thinking about. Whether Alysa thinks about it, she has never said publicly. And that silence is worth noting. Now here is where things get genuinely interesting. And where the story the media tells starts to fall apart a little. Arthur Liu describes himself as a single father. He says it constantly. He said it on 60 Minutes. He says it in interviews. Single dad, raised his kids alone. And that framing has become the dominant narrative around Alysa's family. The heroic single father who did everything. But the actual facts are more complicated than that. When Alysa was born in 2005, Arthur Liu was married. His wife at the time was a woman named Yan Qingxin, who also goes by Mary. And here is the part that almost never gets mentioned. Mary Yan Qingxin continued to serve as legal guardian to Alysa and all 4 of her siblings even after she and Arthur divorced. That is not a minor footnote. That is a significant legal and relational reality. You do not maintain legal guardianship of 5 children you have no connection to. That takes ongoing involvement. That takes paperwork and courts and intentionality. And yet in almost every major piece of coverage about Alysa Liu, Mary Yan Qingxin either does not exist or is mentioned in a single sentence and then dropped. Arthur's framing of himself as the solo parent has basically erased her from the public narrative entirely. Now to be fair, Alysa herself has never publicly spoken about Mary in any meaningful way. She has never addressed what their relationship is like. Whether they are close, whether Mary was present in her life in a hands-on way. That silence could mean many things. It could mean the relationship is distant. It could mean it is private and Alysa wants to keep it that way. It could mean the whole situation is complicated in ways that do not fit neatly into a feel-good Olympic story. What we know for certain is that Mary is legally part of this family's story in a way the world has largely ignored. And that is worth sitting with. The next woman in Alysa's story is one who gets slightly more acknowledgement but still far less than she deserves. Her name is Xu. She is Arthur's mother, Alysa's grandmother. Multiple reports confirm that when Arthur was building his career and raising 5 children largely on his own, his mother Xu was one of the primary people helping him do it. She helped raise Alysa and her siblings during the early years. Think about what that actually means. Alysa was on the ice at 5 a.m. some mornings before school. Someone had to be there for the other kids at home. Someone had to make sure the household ran. Someone had to hold things together while Arthur was driving Alysa to competitions and managing the logistics of raising a prodigy. That person was largely Shu. And nobody talks about her. She does not have a Wikipedia entry. She does not appear in the profile pieces. She is referred to in passing as his mother in a handful of articles, and then the story moves on. But grandmothers who step in to raise grandchildren in the way Shu did are, in every meaningful sense, acting as a mother. The consistency, the daily presence, the stability, those things matter in child development in ways that dwarf what any title or biological connection offers. For a significant stretch of Alysa's childhood, Shu was one of the most constant adult women in her life. The fact that her story is invisible says a lot about whose contributions we choose to center and whose we quietly erase. Now let us talk about the women who came into Alysa's life through the sport itself. Because figure skating, despite being a world where fathers like Arthur were the architects of her career, handed Alysa several women who became deeply formative presences. One of the most important names in her development is Laura Lipetsky. Lipetsky was one of the coaches who worked with Alysa during her rise through the junior ranks. She was at the Oakland Ice Center where Alysa first started skating. And the coaches at Oakland were among the first to see what Alysa was. They were the ones who watched a tiny girl pick up skills that took most kids years, in weeks. Lipetsky was a consistent female presence during some of Alysa's most formative early skating years, in a sport where a coach-athlete relationship often becomes one of the closest relationships in a young athlete's life. Here is something people outside elite youth sports do not always understand. When you are training as intensely as Alysa was from the age of 5, your coaches are not just your technical guides. They become family. They see you cry when you fall. They see you scared before competitions. They are there for the moments your parents sometimes cannot be because they are managing logistics or handling other siblings or doing all the other things that life demands. A female coach at that level, in those years, is functionally a mother figure whether the title is ever used or not. Then there is the figure who looms over Alysa's entire story without ever having actually coached her. Michelle Quan. Arthur Liu has been very public about the fact that he became obsessed with figure skating because of Michelle Quan. She was his entry point into the sport. He watched her compete and something clicked for him. And when Alysa started showing talent at the Oakland Ice Center, it was Quan's spirit, Quan's legacy, Quan's blueprint that Arthur was consciously or unconsciously chasing. Quan is a Chinese-American woman who became the face of American figure skating through the late 1990s and into the 2000s. She represented something specific. She was the proof that a Chinese-American girl could not just compete at the top level of a traditionally white, European-dominated sport but could dominate it. Could own it. Could make it hers. Alysa Liu grew up in the direct shadow of that legacy. And while Quan never coached Alysa, never sat ringside for her practices, never had a direct relationship with her in the way a coach or a guardian would, she shaped the direction of Alysa's entire existence without ever being in the room. That is a particular kind of influence. The mother figure you never meet but whose life becomes the map for your own. Here is something that gets missed almost every time people tell Alysa's story. She came back to skating in 2023 after a 2-year retirement. She had walked away at 16 because she was exhausted and because she had never really had the chance to just be a person. She had been skating since she was 5. She had been homeschooled for most of her life. She had missed the ordinary teenage experiences that most kids take for granted. And she wanted them. She said clearly, "If I keep going now, I will never get the chance to live with my family." So she stopped. She went to high school for real. She enrolled at UCLA and started studying psychology. She climbed to Everest Base Camp with friends. She lived, and then she came back. Now here is the part that connects directly to this story. When Alysa talks about why she came back, she talks about the sport calling her. She talks about unfinished business. But underneath all of that is something that sounds a lot like the influence of the women around her at UCLA, her friends, the version of herself she was building in those 2 years away from the ice. She came back not as the obedient prodigy who did what she was told. She came back on her own terms, with her own voice. As someone who had spent 2 years figuring out who she was outside of skating. That maturity, that self-possession, does not come from nowhere. It comes from the relationships that shaped her during those years away. The friendships. The female friendships specifically, because she has talked about her social life and her connections at UCLA with a warmth that is very real. Those relationships are part of what brought her back as a more complete athlete and a more complete person. Let us zoom out for a second because there is a bigger picture here worth naming. Alysa Liu was raised without a mother in the conventional sense. And the story the world tells about her is a story about a father. A brilliant, obsessive, loving, complicated father who built something extraordinary around his daughter. And that story is true. Arthur Liu is remarkable. What he did is remarkable. But the story that does not get told is about all the women who lived in the spaces Arthur could not fill. The anonymous woman whose egg started everything. The legal guardian who stayed even after the marriage ended. The grandmother who held the household together in the years when Arthur was managing a skating career. The coaches who were there for the emotional moments on the ice. The icon whose legacy became the North Star for a family that had never watched figure skating before. Alysa Liu was not raised by her father alone. She was raised by a constellation of women whose names most of the world does not know and whose contributions most of the coverage has never bothered to examine. And now she is a 2-time Olympic gold medalist. The first American woman to win Olympic gold in figure skating in more than 2 decades. Standing at the top of a sport that her father fell in love with because of a Chinese-American woman he watched on television years before Alysa was even born. When Alysa stood on that podium in Milan in 2026, you probably saw Arthur crying in the crowd. That image was everywhere, and it should be. It is a beautiful thing. But somewhere in that moment there were also invisible presences. A grandmother named Shu who held the family together in the early years. A woman named Mary whose name is on legal documents but not in any interview. Anonymous women whose biological gifts made Alysa's existence possible. Female coaches who were there for the falls and the fears. And a woman named Michelle Quan who never knew she was planting a seed in a father's imagination that would eventually grow into an Olympic champion. Motherhood is not always a title. It is not always a biological fact. It is not always visible. Sometimes it is distributed across years and across people and across roles that do not have a simple name. Alysa Liu has more mothers than the world knows. And their story deserves to be told.